they tell you doubt is dangerous, that it's a weakness, a temptation from some dark corner of your mind that must be resisted. From the pulpit to the pew, doubt is treated like a crack in the wall of faith, something that, if left alone, might make the whole structure collapse. But maybe that's exactly what it is. And maybe that's why they fear it so much. Think about it. Every major religion was built on the idea of certainty, an unshakable conviction that someone, somewhere, already has the truth, that you don't need to question it, you just need to obey it. The moment you start asking, what if they're wrong, the whole chain of authority begins to shake, because authority thrives on confidence, not curiosity. Historically, the punishment for doubt has been severe. In the Middle Ages, questioning the Church's teachings wasn't just frowned upon, it was heresy, a word that carried torture, exile, or death. Giordano Bruno was burned alive for suggesting that the universe might be infinite. Galileo was forced to recant his belief that Earth moves around the sun. These weren't just disagreements over science, they were acts of rebellion against certainty itself. But why such hostility toward doubt? Because doubt is liberation. The moment you allow yourself to question, you no longer belong to the system that claims all answers. You begin to think for yourself. And independent thought is poison to any ideology built on control. Even today, the language of religion keeps this control alive. People are told to have faith like a child. Think about that phrase. A child believes without evidence, without skepticism, without understanding. To have childlike faith is to surrender the adult's critical mind, the part that asks, why? The moment you grow up mentally, you become a threat to the system that depends on blind trust. And that's why doubt is branded a sin, not because it harms anyone, but because it dismantles the hierarchy, because it shifts power from those who claim to speak for truth to the individual who seeks truth on their own terms. When someone says, don't question God, what they really mean is, don't question us. The voice of God, in organized religion, is always mediated by human beings, priests, imams, pastors, scriptures, traditions. Questioning God means questioning the entire human infrastructure that claims to represent him. It's not divine offense they fear, it's loss of influence. But there's another layer to this. Doubt isn't just seen as disobedience. It's moralized. It's made to feel dirty. People are told that even thinking skeptical thoughts is dangerous, that it distances them from salvation. This psychological conditioning creates guilt for using your own reason. It's a brilliant design. You don't even need external punishment if the believer is trained to punish themselves with shame. Imagine being told that the very tool that helps you discern truth, your reason, is the enemy of truth. That's how religions maintain loyalty, by framing curiosity as betrayal. If someone can make you afraid of your own mind, they've already conquered it. The irony is that the world's greatest advancements, in science, ethics, and art, all began with doubt. Every discovery is born from the refusal to accept what everyone else takes for granted. Doubt is not the absence of belief. It's the presence of thought. It's the quiet whisper that says, maybe there's more. Religious systems often pretend to embrace questions, but only within safe boundaries. Ask how God works, not if he exists. Ask what he meant, not whether it makes sense. It's like a maze designed to make you feel like you're exploring, when in reality, you're just walking in circles inside the walls they've built for you. In many communities, doubt is met with fear. Not fear of punishment, but fear of social exile. The moment you start asking real questions, people pull away. You become a problem, a potential bad influence. Faith groups thrive on conformity because collective certainty feels like safety. A doubter is seen as a threat to the group's emotional stability, like a person who opens a window in a room full of people who don't want to see outside. But here's the strange thing. Everyone doubts. Every believer at some point wonders if it's real. They just learn to suppress it, to smother it under rituals, prayer, and repetition. But you can't kill doubt. You can only bury it alive. And buried doubt doesn't disappear. It festers. It becomes anxiety, guilt, or fanaticism. Because when you're not allowed to question, the mind finds other darker ways to express its unrest. So, why is doubt a sin? Because it's the seed of freedom. It's the starting point of every real change, both personal and societal. No empire of belief can survive long when its subjects begin to ask, "Why should I obey?" Doubt is the enemy of control, and that's why it's forbidden. Religious leaders often say, faith means believing without seeing. But isn't that the definition of gullibility? If a friend told you to trust them completely, without evidence, and never to question their motives, would you call that love or manipulation? The difference is only in branding. In religion, manipulation is repackaged as virtue, and yet, doubt doesn't destroy meaning, it deepens it. To question is to care enough to understand, to seek clarity, not chaos. It's not rebellion against truth, it's rebellion against lies pretending to be truth. The greatest moral courage isn't in blind faith, it's in the willingness to say, "I don't know, but I want to find out." Religions often claim to value truth, but truth doesn't need protection. Lies do. If an idea is true, it survives scrutiny. If it can't, it doesn't deserve your belief. That's the ultimate test of faith. Not how strongly you hold it, but whether it can withstand your own questions. And that's why doubt will always be condemned, because it reveals that the emperor of faith has no clothes. If doubt is the first step toward freedom, then blind certainty is the first step toward obedience. And obedience, not love, not understanding, is what most religions have always demanded above all. The story has always been simple: question, and you fall; believe, and you are saved. But this framing hides something essential, that the command to believe without question isn't spiritual guidance. It's a method of social control. Look back at history, and you'll see the same pattern repeating itself. Whenever authority is threatened, it calls doubt rebellion. The church called skeptics heretics. Monarchs called dissenters traitors. Dictators call critics enemies of the state. The words change, but the mechanism stays the same. Power fears questions because questions erode certainty, and certainty is the glue that holds obedience together. The word sin is crucial here. It transforms a disagreement into a moral crime. It doesn't just say you're wrong, it says you're bad. That's a very different kind of control. Once people believe their curiosity offends the divine, they censor themselves. They start policing their own thoughts, and that's far more effective than any external punishment could ever be. This moral framing is psychological genius. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to make you afraid. Think about it. What could be more effective than convincing someone that an invisible being watches every thought, waiting to judge them? You don't need prisons if people carry their own mental jail. Every sin of doubt becomes an act of self-punishment. Consider how many people have whispered questions in secret, terrified that even thinking them might bring divine anger. A child raised to believe that questioning faith equals spiritual death grows into an adult who never truly trusts their own mind. And when you can't trust your mind, you need others to think for you. That's how control survives generation after generation. What's often forgotten is that religion didn't just condemn doubt, it monopolized it. It turned questioning into a privilege reserved for prophets, priests, and theologians. Ordinary people were forbidden to interpret scripture on their own. The church decided what was literal, what was symbolic, what was true, what was blasphemy. The hierarchy didn't eliminate doubt, it centralized it. You could doubt, but only under supervision. This pattern still exists today, just in softer forms. In many religious circles, there's a narrow range of acceptable doubt. You can struggle with your faith as long as you ultimately reaffirm it. You can question details, but never the foundation. The structure encourages the performance of inquiry, not its reality. It's like a sandbox for curiosity, safe, contained, and ultimately meaningless. And when someone's doubt goes beyond those boundaries, they're labeled lost, fallen, or confused. Notice the language. It assumes that questioning is a deviation from the right path, that to think freely is to get lost. But what if the path itself was never meant to lead you anywhere? What if it's a loop designed to keep you walking forever, convinced you're progressing while you're actually standing still? The irony is that doubt has always been the engine of human progress. Every revolution, scientific, moral, or social, began when someone refused to accept what everyone else believed. When Copernicus doubted that Earth was the center of the universe, it changed how we see ourselves. When abolitionists doubted the moral logic of slavery justified by Scripture, it reshaped humanity's conscience. When women doubted that submission was their divine duty, it redefined equality. Yet, even now in the modern world, doubt is still stigmatized. In many places, asking uncomfortable questions about faith can cost you family, friends, or even your life. There are nations where questioning religion is literally a crime punishable by death. That alone tells you something profound. Truth doesn't need protection from questions. Lies do. It's easy to underestimate the courage it takes to doubt in such an environment. People think rebellion is about loud defiance, but sometimes it's just a quiet thought whispered to yourself at night. What if none of this is true? That thought alone can shake an entire belief system. And that's why institutions react to it with such violence. The smallest question can cause the biggest cracks. In the scriptures of many religions, doubt is personified as evil, the serpent, the deceiver, the tempter. But notice what those figures actually do. They don't force anyone to do anything. They ask questions. Did God really say that? Why not eat the fruit of knowledge? The so-called enemy of God isn't destruction. It's inquiry. The story is older than the book itself. The pursuit of knowledge framed as rebellion, curiosity painted as corruption. Think about how deeply that story has shaped our moral instincts. Knowledge is dangerous, curiosity is suspect, and obedience is virtue. Children learn this before they learn how to reason, and by the time they grow up, it's no longer a story. It's a reflex. When something feels uncertain, they feel guilt. When they start questioning, they feel fear. The system doesn't just teach what to think, it teaches how to feel about thinking. And this emotional conditioning has lasting effects. Studies in cognitive psychology have shown that people raised in rigid religious environments experience measurable anxiety when exposed to conflicting information. It's not just disagreement, it's existential discomfort. The brain has been trained to associate uncertainty with danger. Doubt doesn't feel like curiosity. It feels like sin. This is why some believers cling harder to their faith the more evidence they see against it. It's not about reason, it's about identity. To question the belief is to question the self. And when a belief defines your meaning, your family, your community, and your hope for eternity, doubt becomes terrifying. It's not merely losing faith, it's losing your entire psychological home. But that's exactly why doubt matters, because it's the only way out of that psychological cage. It's not destruction, it's rebirth. When you allow yourself to question, you start rebuilding meaning from the ground up, not from fear, but from honesty. Doubt isn't the enemy of belief, it's the beginning of understanding. Because if your belief can't survive your own questions, then maybe it's not worth believing. The philosopher Paul Tillich once wrote that, doubt is not the opposite of faith, it is an element of faith. But religious institutions don't want you to see it that way. Because if doubt becomes part of the process, authority loses its grip. You no longer need intermediaries between you and truth. You start seeing that revelation doesn't come from holy books, it comes from human curiosity. That's the quiet revolution that happens when you embrace doubt. You stop outsourcing your thinking. You stop surrendering your judgment to those who claim divine authority. You reclaim ownership of your mind. And that's precisely what the word sin was invented to prevent. The most powerful systems of control never need to raise a sword. They only need to convince people that thinking differently is dangerous. Religion achieved this long before governments and corporations learned to imitate it. It did something extraordinary. It made people feel guilty for being curious. It labeled questioning as pride, and pride as rebellion, and rebellion as sin. That chain of logic is what keeps minds obedient long after chains have been broken. You can see this in how religious education is structured. Children are taught stories before they're capable of skepticism. They're told that questioning these stories isn't just rude, it's spiritually risky. By the time they reach the age where critical thinking develops, the emotional foundation is already set. Logic becomes secondary to fear. Every religion knows this. That's why indoctrination starts young, and curiosity is deflected with phrases like, "Some things are not meant to be understood." But think about what that really means. If an all-powerful being exists, wouldn't curiosity, the drive to understand its creation, be the highest form of reverence? Wouldn't the desire to know more about existence be a divine impulse rather than a moral crime? The message that knowledge is dangerous isn't divine wisdom. It's human insecurity. It comes from those who fear what knowledge might reveal. Every authority figure, whether religious or political, understands that ignorance stabilizes power. The fewer people question, the easier it is to rule. That's why religious systems often blur the line between loyalty to God and loyalty to the institution. The result is psychological confusion. People think they're being faithful to the divine, but they're really being faithful to those who interpret it for them. Even within supposedly open-minded religious environments, this manipulation persists. A sermon may begin with, "It's okay to doubt," but it always ends with, "God will lead you back to the truth." Doubt is tolerated only as a temporary illness, never as a healthy process. You're allowed to wander as long as you return. The purpose of doubt, in their view, isn't discovery. It's obedience through crisis. It's spiritual drama, not genuine inquiry. And yet, the history of religion itself is full of doubt, not in the followers, but in the founders. The prophets, the reformers, the philosophers who shaped religious traditions all began by doubting the doctrines of their time. Buddha doubted the authority of the Brahmins. Jesus doubted the moral rigidity of Jewish law. Muhammad doubted the idolatry of his people. The irony is that every religion began as a rejection of certainty, only to later demand that same certainty from its followers. Once an idea becomes institutionalized, it stops evolving. It fossilizes. The movement that began as liberation becomes dogma. The word faith transforms from courage to conformity. And the most human of all instincts, the desire to know, is turned into a threat. This is why the most devout often become the most fearful, not of evil, but of being wrong. Fear of being wrong is what chains people to untested beliefs. It's why apologists spend their lives defending doctrine instead of exploring truth. It's why believers rationalize contradictions instead of confronting them. The goal isn't to find answers, it's to protect identity. That's the true function of calling doubt a sin. It ties your worth to your certainty. It teaches that being mistaken is shameful instead of educational. That's tragic because the willingness to be wrong is what allows humans to grow. Science is built on it. Every discovery starts with the acceptance that our previous understanding was incomplete. But religion, by design, discourages that humility. It tells you that truth was already delivered, final and absolute. Any new knowledge that doesn't fit the old framework must therefore be false. This mindset doesn't protect truth, it protects stagnation. You can see the consequences of this mindset everywhere, from the rejection of evolution to the denial of climate science. The same psychology applies. If your sacred texts already contain all wisdom, then new information becomes a threat, not an opportunity. And because questioning is sinful, the believer's identity becomes tied to resisting evidence. Ignorance becomes a virtue disguised as faithfulness. But doubt isn't the destruction of faith, it's its refinement. It's the intellectual immune system that filters falsehoods from truth. Without it, any idea can infect the mind. Blind belief is the perfect host for manipulation. Throughout history, tyrants and cult leaders alike have used religion's allergy to doubt as their greatest weapon. They didn't need to prove they were right. They only needed to convince people it was sinful to ask if they were wrong. Think of how many horrors were committed by people who never doubted they were doing God's will. The Crusades, the Inquisition, witch trials, honor killings, terrorist bombings, genocides justified as divine duty, every one of them born from moral certainty, the refusal to question, the conviction that doubt is weakness. No human being commits atrocity with the words, "I might be mistaken." Doubt humanizes, certainty dehumanizes. The philosopher Voltaire warned about this when he said, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." Doubt is the antidote to that. It's not an attack on morality, it's its foundation, because only when you question your beliefs can you ensure they aren't harming others. Yet, religion teaches the opposite, that morality depends on faith, that without divine rules, people would have no reason to be good. But history shows that moral progress always came from doubting those divine rules. The abolition of slavery, the acceptance of science, the fight for women's and LGBTQ rights, all of these were born from questioning sacred doctrines that justified cruelty. Doubt didn't corrupt morality, it expanded it. And that's what terrifies religious institutions. If morality can exist without faith, then faith loses its monopoly on goodness. If doubt can lead to compassion, then sin loses its meaning. the entire moral structure begins to collapse, not because it's attacked, but because it's exposed. To call doubt a sin, then, isn't to protect truth, it's to protect power, because power depends on certainty. The priest must speak with divine authority. The scripture must be perfect. The believer must never hesitate. Doubt makes all of that impossible. It introduces ambiguity, nuance, perspective, all the things that make manipulation difficult. But there's another subtler reason why doubt threatens religion. It restores responsibility to the individual. When you stop outsourcing truth to an external authority, you realize that morality, meaning, and purpose are yours to define. That's a heavy burden, but also a profound freedom. Religion calls that arrogance. In reality, it's maturity. The child obeys because it fears punishment. The adult questions because it seeks understanding. Calling doubt a sin is how religion keeps adults thinking like children, afraid to ask, desperate to please, convinced that ignorance is purity. Yet doubt doesn't destroy meaning. It rebuilds it from a stronger foundation. It replaces inherited conviction with earned understanding. It replaces guilt with curiosity. It's the bridge between who you were told to be and who you truly are. That's why every spiritual tyrant, every self-proclaimed messenger of truth, fears it so deeply. Because once doubt enters the mind, faith can never fully close the door again. There's a strange paradox in how religion treats doubt. On one hand, it condemns it. On the other, it depends on it. Without doubt, there would be no need for faith at all. If something could be proven, faith wouldn't be required. The very existence of religion relies on uncertainty, yet it punishes anyone who tries to explore that uncertainty too deeply. It's a self-preserving loop. Create confusion, then sell certainty as the cure. This paradox isn't accidental, it's essential. Doubt keeps the believer dependent. You're told that it's natural to question, but sinful to trust your own conclusions. So, you must return to the institution for reassurance. Every doubt becomes a marketing opportunity, a chance to renew loyalty. It's spiritual dependence disguised as devotion. Like a company that breaks your confidence so you'll buy their self-help product, religion creates the wound and sells the bandage. And the most effective way to make people doubt themselves is through guilt. Guilt is the currency of control. It doesn't require force, only conditioning. You confess your own thoughts, police your own emotions, and internalize your own surveillance. You don't need to be watched when you've learned to fear your own mind. That's what calling doubt a sin accomplishes. It colonizes the conscience. Consider how this dynamic shows up in everyday life. A believer begins to question a verse, a miracle, a contradiction. They're told, that's the devil trying to tempt you. The thought itself is demonized. Now the person's own reasoning feels like an external attack. What's the next step? Prayer, repentance, submission, all reinforcing the very belief that caused the fear. The system is self-sustaining. The more you think, the guiltier you feel. The guiltier you feel, the harder you cling to belief. You can see this especially in confession-based traditions. Doubt is treated like a moral failure, something to be cleansed. People kneel and apologize for thinking. Imagine the power of that. An institution that makes you seek forgiveness not for your actions, but for your intelligence. It's an ancient trick. Redefine curiosity as corruption, and you'll never have to silence people. They'll silence themselves. The psychology behind this isn't mystical. It's deeply human. We all crave certainty because uncertainty feels unsafe. In primitive times, uncertainty could mean danger, a predator in the dark, a poisonous plant, a storm on the horizon. Our brains evolved to seek clear answers. Religion exploits that instinct by offering the illusion of absolute security, the promise that someone knows the answers, that you can rest because the mystery is already solved. Doubt disrupts that illusion. It reintroduces the unknown. It demands that you live with questions instead of easy answers. And that's uncomfortable. But discomfort is the birthplace of growth. The mind that never doubts never learns, because it never leaves the comfort of its first assumptions. Religion replaces that discomfort with the narcotic of certainty. And once you're hooked, it feels unbearable to let go. The addiction to certainty explains why people cling to beliefs even when they contradict observable reality. When doubt threatens the illusion, it triggers the same defensive mechanisms as withdrawal, denial, anger, projection. all symptoms of a mind trying to protect its identity from collapse. The more intelligent the believer, the more elaborate the rationalizations become. Faith turns into a puzzle where every piece must fit, even if you have to reshape the edges yourself. And so, doubt becomes the forbidden thought, the unspoken question. Not because it's irrational, but because it's too rational, because it starts pulling the thread that unravels the whole tapestry. That's why, in religious language, doubt is often associated with betrayal. Losing faith sounds like infidelity, as if you've broken a sacred relationship. That's not accidental. It reframes intellectual honesty as emotional treason. The fear of doubt is really the fear of loneliness. For many people, faith isn't just a set of beliefs. It's an identity, a community, a family. To question it feels like exile. You're not just doubting ideas. You're risking connection. The cost of honesty becomes social isolation. That's why doubt feels like sin. Not because it offends God, but because it separates you from the group that defines your sense of belonging. Sociologists have observed this pattern across all forms of belief, not just religion. People will often defend the tribe over the truth. Once an idea becomes a social bond, questioning it feels like betrayal. And that's why religions don't just teach doctrine. They build identity around it. They make the belief who you are. So, if you doubt the belief, you doubt yourself. And self-doubt is far more paralyzing than skepticism. This is why religious indoctrination often uses emotional conditioning rather than evidence. Fear, guilt, love, belonging, these are primal forces. They override logic. You can debate a person's ideas, but not their fear of losing heaven or their love for their family. Religion knows this. It doesn't need to win the argument, it just needs to make the question too painful to ask. But doubt isn't pain. It's clarity. Breaking through confusion. It's what happens when your mind finally notices the cracks in the story. It's the moment you realize that belief isn't knowledge, and obedience isn't virtue. It's not easy, but it's honest. And honesty, unlike faith, doesn't demand perfection. It allows contradiction, complexity, uncertainty, the very things that make us human. In that sense, doubt isn't the enemy of morality or meaning. It's their foundation. Because real morality isn't obedience, it's empathy. And real meaning doesn't come from answers handed down. It comes from questions you've earned through experience. A belief untested by doubt is like a bridge untested by weight. Beautiful, until someone steps on it. Theologians often claim that doubt weakens faith, but what it really weakens is authority. It exposes the fragility of doctrines that depend on emotional blackmail. When you start to doubt, you're not betraying truth, you're testing it. And anything true will survive that test. The only ideas that fear doubt are the ones that can't stand without permission. Religion has always portrayed doubt as darkness and faith as light. But in reality, doubt is the candle you light to see through the dark. Faith asks you to close your eyes and call it illumination. The difference is everything. Doubt may not give you all the answers, but it gives you something far more valuable: the courage to face reality without needing it to flatter you. In a way, calling doubt a sin is the greatest confession of weakness religion ever made, because only fragile ideas fear questions. Only insecure truths need silence to survive. If the divine truly existed, no question could harm it. And if a belief is true, no amount of doubt could destroy it. The fact that doubt is forbidden tells you everything about the fragility of what's being protected. When you're told that doubt leads you astray, remember, the only path that can't tolerate questions is the one that doesn't lead anywhere. Every era has its forbidden thoughts. In ancient times, it was the idea that the earth moves around the sun. In more recent times, it was that morality could exist without divine command. Today, the forbidden thought is simpler, but more radical. What if faith itself is the problem? That's where doubt leads if you let it run free. And that's why religion has spent thousands of years building walls around it. Those walls aren't made of logic. They're made of fear, guilt, and identity. They're built from stories designed not to answer questions, but to stop them from being asked. Stories like Eve and the serpent, where curiosity is the original crime, or Job, where questioning divine justice is treated as arrogance, or Thomas, who doubted the resurrection and was scolded for wanting evidence. Each story reinforces the same lesson. Obedience is virtue, curiosity is betrayal. But here's what's often overlooked: the human. Instinct behind these stories is not divine, it's political. Every hierarchy, from temple to throne, has needed obedience more than truth, and obedience requires a population afraid of its own mind. Religion simply perfected the formula. By redefining doubt as sin, it ensured that people would police themselves long before anyone else had to. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance reduction. When people hold beliefs that conflict with evidence, they experience discomfort, a kind of mental tension. To resolve it, they either change their beliefs or rationalize the evidence away. Religion teaches the latter. It trains you to reinterpret reality until it fits the doctrine. If something doesn't make sense, you're told your understanding is flawed, not the belief. Doubt becomes not a signal to investigate, but a reminder to repent. That's why believers can hold contradictory ideas without noticing. A merciful God who sends people to eternal torment. A perfect creator whose world is full of flaws. A benevolent deity who demands blood sacrifices. These contradictions would collapse under scrutiny, but the prohibition of doubt prevents that scrutiny from happening. The mind learns to fold in on itself, to twist logic until the impossible feels holy. And it's not just individuals who do this. Entire civilizations have structured themselves around this avoidance of doubt. For centuries, religious institutions held back scientific progress precisely because they feared what doubt would reveal. The church didn't just oppose astronomy or biology, it opposed the mindset that asked, what if the book is wrong? That mindset, once unleashed, doesn't stop at the stars or the fossils. It eventually turns its gaze on every authority. That's why doubt is not merely intellectual. It's revolutionary. The same psychological mechanism that leads someone to question scripture is what leads someone to question kings, laws, and social hierarchies. The power structure knows this. That's why totalitarian regimes often behave like religions. They demand absolute loyalty, demonize dissent, and redefine doubt as treason. Faith and tyranny are siblings. They both require silence to survive. If you look closely, the language is almost identical. Have faith in the leader. Believe without question. Doubt is betrayal. The slogans of authoritarianism and religion echo each other because they serve the same psychological function: to make submission feel righteous, to make obedience seem moral. Once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. This is why the most dangerous thing in any system of power isn't rebellion, it's curiosity. Rebellion can be crushed, but curiosity spreads. It whispers in quiet moments. It infects minds invisibly. It makes people start to see the cracks in the walls they were taught were sacred. You can silence a rebel, but you can't silence a question that's already been asked. In religious history, every time doubt spread widely, institutions panicked. The Reformation, the Enlightenment, the rise of secular philosophy, each was born from people who refused to accept inherited truth. And each time, religious leaders responded the same way, by labeling these movements as immoral, not incorrect, immoral, because morality is the last refuge of belief systems that can't defend themselves intellectually. Calling doubt a sin reframes a cognitive process as a moral failure. It's a psychological trap. Instead of asking, is this true? The believer asks, what's wrong with me for even wondering? The question becomes self-accusation. The mind turns inward, fighting itself instead of confronting the idea. It's the perfect defense mechanism, and it's why so many intelligent people remain trapped in irrational systems. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they've been taught to feel guilty for using it. And yet, no society has ever moved forward without the courage to doubt. Every moral milestone in human history, from ending slavery to recognizing human rights, began with someone saying, what if our beliefs are wrong? Religion often claims ownership of morality, but history shows the opposite. Progress happens when people defy scripture, not when they follow it, when they trust conscience over commandment, when they allow doubt to do its work. That's why doubt feels dangerous, because it is. It's dangerous to the status quo, to inherited authority, to every hierarchy that feeds on submission. It exposes that the emperor or the priest has no clothes. It reminds us that no one has a monopoly on truth. And that realization threatens not just institutions, but entire worldviews built on dependence. But there's also beauty in that danger. Doubt is not a void, it's a space. The moment you stop pretending to know, the world expands. You begin to see wonder not as something owned by religion, but as something woven into existence itself. Science, art, philosophy, all are forms of reverence without submission. They're what happen when curiosity is allowed to breathe instead of being buried under dogma. If you've ever felt the quiet unease of doubt, know that it's not weakness, it's intelligence in motion. It's the mind's immune system doing what it was designed to do, protecting you from deception. To doubt is to respect truth enough to test it. To question is to love reality more than comfort. That's not sin, that's integrity. But of course, integrity has always been costly. It means walking away from certainty, from community, sometimes from family. It means being misunderstood. Every great thinker who changed the world paid that price. Socrates was executed for corrupting the youth. His crime was asking questions. Galileo was silenced. Hypatia was murdered. Giordano Bruno burned. The pattern is ancient. When faith feels threatened, it kills its critics and calls it virtue. And yet, despite every attempt to suppress it, doubt keeps returning. Like gravity, it can't be undone. It's part of what makes us human. You can bury it under ritual and fear, but it always finds a way back through the cracks, because the mind's natural state is curiosity. And that's something no doctrine can fully extinguish. In a sense, religion fears doubt for the same reason darkness fears light. Not because it's malicious, but because it reveals. Doubt strips away illusions, exposes contradictions, and forces us to confront what's real. And reality, unlike faith, doesn't bend to desire. It just is. To live honestly in that reality, even without all the answers, is far nobler than living comfortably in illusion. Faith says, don't ask. Doubt says, keep looking. And history has shown which voice moves humanity forward. Every belief system that fears doubt reveals its own fragility. If truth is eternal, why would it tremble before a question? Why would an omnipotent being need fragile humans to defend its reputation from curiosity? The very idea that truth could be threatened by thought is absurd. And yet, this fear of inquiry lies at the heart of every religion that calls doubt a sin. To understand why, you have to see doubt not as an intellectual act, but as an act of independence. Doubt is the refusal to outsource your judgment. It's what happens when you stop asking others to tell you what's real and begin looking for yourself. And that shift, from obedience to autonomy, is catastrophic for any system that thrives on submission. When someone doubts, they stop being a follower and start being a person. That's the real sin. There's a profound irony in how religious leaders talk about humility. They say humility means submitting to divine authority, admitting you don't know. But that's not humility, that's abdication. Real humility is accepting that no one knows for sure. It's recognizing that truth isn't owned by anyone, least of all by those who claim divine privilege. The priest says, you must believe. The humble thinker says, I don't know, but I'll keep searching. Which of those two is truly modest before the vastness of existence? Religion doesn't fear arrogance. It fears independence. Arrogance is predictable. It can be shamed. Independence can't. The person who doubts becomes unpredictable, unmanageable. They can no longer be bribed with promises of paradise or threatened with visions of hell. Their morality no longer depends on reward or punishment. They act not because of command, but because of conscience. That kind of person is immune to control. That's why so many prophets, reformers, and philosophers who began as believers ended up outcasts. They stopped needing permission to think. They started seeing that moral integrity doesn't come from obedience to a book, but from compassion, reason, and empathy, qualities that require no divine approval. Once you realize that, the entire logic of sin collapses. If your choices can be guided by empathy instead of fear, then the moral power of religion evaporates. Doubt doesn't destroy meaning, it rebuilds it. It replaces myth with mystery, the good kind, the honest kind, the kind that doesn't pretend to have answers but inspires you to look deeper. When you stop fearing uncertainty, you start to appreciate reality for what it is. Not a puzzle to be solved, but a process to be understood. The universe stops being a test and becomes an experience. And in that freedom, morality stops being dictated. It becomes chosen. You start doing good not because someone commanded it, but because you've thought about what goodness means. You care not because you're afraid of punishment, but because you understand the suffering of others. That's the evolution religion never wanted to happen. The moment when morality outgrows mythology. In that sense, doubt is the bridge between childhood and maturity. It's what separates inherited beliefs from earned understanding. Every person who's ever grown intellectually or spiritually has passed through that phase. The discomfort of not knowing, the tension between loyalty and honesty. It's painful, but it's necessary. Because without it, your beliefs never become yours. They remain someone else's script, read through your mouth. To doubt is to rewrite that script. To start asking, what if I'm wrong? What if they're wrong? What if the truth is something entirely different from what I've been told? Those questions are dangerous, not because they offend heaven, but because they expose the machinery of control on earth. Once you start pulling that thread, the robe of authority begins to unravel. You begin to see how religion's greatest achievement wasn't connecting people to God. It was disconnecting them from their own reason. Doubt restores that connection. It reunites you with your ability to think, to question, to observe. It replaces dogma with dialogue and submission with discovery. And once that happens, the sacred becomes something very different. It's no longer locked inside temples or books. It's in the curiosity of the child, the honesty of the scientist, the courage of the skeptic. It's in the endless human pursuit of understanding. Imperfect, uncertain, but real. Religion calls that sin. But what could be holier than truth itself? Consider how different the world could be if doubt were seen not as disobedience, but as devotion, not to gods, but to reality. If every child were taught that questions are gifts, not dangers, that no idea, no authority, no belief is above examination. Imagine the humility it would take to live that way, and the strength. Because doubt isn't easy. It takes courage to face a universe without guarantees, to say, I don't know, and keep walking anyway. That's not weakness. That's the purest form of integrity. The great scientist Richard Feynman once said, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. That single sentence dismantles the entire logic of calling doubt a sin. Because the sin isn't in asking, it's in forbidding the question. Faith tells you that uncertainty is dangerous. But the truth is, uncertainty is where every discovery begins. Every insight, every innovation, every work of art or science or philosophy, all of them started with someone daring to question the accepted story. Humanity's progress is nothing more than the accumulation of questions religion once called heresy. And the irony is, doubt doesn't kill awe, it deepens it. The more we learn, the more wondrous the world becomes. When you stop explaining everything with, God did it, you start appreciating how intricate and astonishing reality truly is. The nebula, the atom, the mind, these aren't diminished by understanding, they're glorified by it. Doubt doesn't drain the magic from life. It reveals that the magic was real all along, just hidden behind superstition. That's the truth religious dogma can't afford you to see. That wonder doesn't need worship. That meaning doesn't need mythology. That morality doesn't need heaven. Everything you need to live wisely, compassionately, and truthfully exists right here, in the human capacity to think and feel. The moment you embrace that, sin loses its meaning. You stop needing permission to be good. So, maybe doubt isn't the opposite of faith at all. Maybe it's the evolution of it. The stage where belief grows up and faces the world as it is, without props or promises. The moment faith sheds its fear and becomes curiosity. The moment you stop needing to believe and start daring to know. That's the real reason doubt was called a sin. Because the moment you stop fearing your questions, no one can control your answers. If you're still here, listening, thinking, maybe even doubting, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? What time is it there? And what do you think, is doubt a flaw or is it freedom? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.